أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد رب يسر ولا تعسر رب تمم بالخير رب زدنا علما وارزقنا فهما أما بعد المعقد الرابع صرف الهمة فيه إلى علم القرآن والسنة. So far we have covered the first three foundations of seeking knowledge. Can anyone remind me what they were? Briefly, just in one word, one or two words. What was the first principle? One of the first ma'aqid of al-ilm, the first foundation, the first peg that grounds us in knowledge. What was the first thing that we learned together? It was the al-ma'aqid al-awwal was cleansing the vessel in which ilm is going to be placed, right? And that is the heart, right? So the first principle was purification of the heart. And we learned that the purification of the heart is not achieved except with the two things that we learned. One, cleansing our hearts of the shubuhat and cleansing our hearts of the shahawat. We've explained what shubuhat mean and what shahawat mean, right? We know these words, inshallah. And we said that the asl of this was the al-ma'aqid al-thani, right? The second principle, which was, what was the second principle? Al-ma'aqid al-thani, the second foundation. That was the rectification of the intentions, right? Having the right sincere intentions for Allah Azza wa Jal, right? Whatever you do it for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, right? And we said that this is the asl, this is the foundation, which is the true foundation, right? Everything begins with an honest thought, an honest self-reflection, and that leads to someone being sincere with themselves, and then that leads to them trying or making the effort to cleanse themselves of any filth that resides in their hearts or their minds, right? So from the shahawat and the shubuhat. And then we learned about the third ma'aqid. Does anyone remember what was the third ma'aqid? What was the third principle? Yes, al-himma, right? Al-himma fi talab al-ilm, طيب في تحصيله. Having high aspirations, right? And that entails a few things, right? Al-hirs ala ma yanfa'uk, right? Wasta'in billah wa la ta'jiz. It entails three things. What do we mean when we say a Muslim, especially a talib al-ilm, a student of knowledge, should have high aspirations, have high ambitions in ilm, in serving Allah's deen? We said that it means to one, be excessively diligent and eager, come with this burning energy and desire to attain what benefits them in the dunya and the akhirah. And of course, in this case, we are talking about ilm tawheed, right? The ilm of Allah Azza wa Jal, the Quran, the revelation, the wahi, which gives life to the soul, which gives life to our beings, which gives life to the whole world, right? The Quran and the Sunnah. طيب. So, a man or a woman, a talib al-ilm, a Muslim, fundamentally speaking, they should strive as much as they can towards that benefits them. طيب. How do they do that? By seeking assistance from Allah Azza wa Jal. طيب. Now that they are striving and they are seeking assistance from Allah Azza wa Jal, what do they not do? They don't give up, right? They don't leave this path. Now that they've started this journey, لا تعجز, do not give up, right? Do not become overburdened. Take things one at a time, take things in a peaceful manner. do things according to the right manhajiyah, and all the things that we mentioned initially in the dars, right? But don't give up, right? And we mentioned how this just one issue of attaining something, trying to attain something that you think benefits you, and then seeking assistance from Allah Azza wa Jal, but then giving up. And we said, for example, as a side note, how many marriages they fail because people are not able to. They're not able to put through the difficult times, right? And they completely miss the point when it comes to that. So in this principle, essentially, it applies to all aspects of life, as we discussed in detail in that lesson. طيب? Now, what truly benefits us in the akhirah? So what truly deserves our hirs? Where do we direct our energies? طيب? That is the topic of this maqid. Okay? Now that you've decided that you are going to have sincere intentions, you are going to seek this knowledge because you want to serve the Tawheed, you want to carry on the mission of the Anbiya, which is to revive the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal, fight kufr and shirk, and inshallah live for the i'la kalimatillah, right? For raising the word of Allah Azza wa Jal, making it the highest in the world. طيب? Once you've decided that, right, and you have this sincere intentions, and in that path you're cleansing your heart from all its impurities, whether to be of doubts or desires, and you're striving and you're seeking assistance. Where is all of this energy directed towards? The asl, right? Where is this knowledge, right? All of Tawheed, all of what Allah Azza wa Jalla has communicated to you is knowledge, right? All of that He's given you, and all of that you have, the true wealth that you have as a Muslim is what? The ilm riwayah, right? The knowledge of revelation. That Allah has ilm al-wahi, Allah has sent down for you, طيب? Through His messengers, and then the Sahaba, how much they sacrificed for this to reach you, right? After them the tabi'een and atba' tabi'een, and after them the scholars of the Ummah, how many sacrifices. We can go on, and Imam al-Dhahabi rahimahullah, he's mentioned he's written a 40-volume book detailing the lives of the ulama, how much, what they've gone through, in this process. All of that, those energies, that hirs is directed towards this fourth principle, which is صرف الهمة فيه إلى علم القرآن والسنة, directing the high aspirations, the ambitions, فيه, in this knowledge, in this path, إلى علم القرآن والسنة, towards the knowledge of Al-Quran wa Sunnah. Why these two? It's because this is the asl. This is the only thing that Allah Azza wa Jalla has communicated to us, right? And He communicated this to the first generation, right? So they became the receivers. طيب? That is our deen in its totality. طيب? And we're going to talk about these two azim, these great principles, the great foundations, the only two foundations in our deen. Subhanallah. يقول the Shaykh says, إن كل علم نافع مرده إلى كلام الله وكلام رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Indeed, every knowledge which is beneficial, علم نافع, beneficial knowledge, مرده, its reference, its returning point, it returns back to إلى كلام الله, towards the kalam of Allah Azza wa Jal, towards the speech of Allah Azza wa Jal, and as well كلام رسوله, and the speech of His Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم. طيب. وباقي العلوم. So where does that leave the rest of the sciences? وباقي, and the rest, العلوم of the sciences, وباقي العلوم إما خادم لهما, either they are servants to these two, لهما, these two, خادم, servant, either they are a servant to these two, فيؤخذ منه ما تتحقق به الخدمة. So is taken from these tertiary sciences, what تتحقق به الخدمة, what or through which the service is actualized. تتحقق به is actualized with it, الخدمة, the service. Whatever service you want to take from this science, right? If the science does not serve that purpose, then it's the second category. Okay? So either the sciences other than the Quran and Sunnah are khadim للقرآن والسنة, they are servants to the Quran and Sunnah, they serve the book of Allah, they serve the Sunnah. So you take from them which helps you actualize this service. For example, the science of nahu, grammar, right? Sarf. Why do you study these two sciences? Why do you study al-balagha, for example, these sciences of al-lugha, right? You study them because the service they provide you is to understand the Quran and Sunnah ala wajh sahih, right? In the correct manner, right? With the right i'rab, with the right sarf, so you understand the words deeply, the individual words. You understand the textual context, the syntax of the ayat. Then you understand the discourse analysis of in which context were the verses revealed, and how does the structure of the words in a sentence change the meaning. Like we said, for example, just the changing of, I always bring this example because this is relevant to all of us. When you say إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, how does this sentence glorify Tawheed? When you say إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, you're glorifying the Tawheed of Allah. You are exalting, you're magnifying the Tawheed of Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? If it wasn't this case, if it wasn't this ayah, if it wasn't in this particular order, if you did not have إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ, but rather had نَعْبُدُ إِيَّاكَ, right? What difference would that make? It would make the difference of kufr and shirk. It would make the difference of kufr and shirk. That's how big it is. How? If you say نَعْبُدُ إِيَّاكَ, you're saying we worship you. Leaving the ihtimal, leaving this room for a doubt that you perhaps worship someone else as well. That you haven't specified this, or you, the word iyaka, the recipient, the object of this worship. You haven't singled this object out for worship. When you say na'budu iyaka, it has this room for interpretation that there might be others that you might worship. Okay? But the moment you say iyaka na'bud, that bringing the object to the beginning, like you, iyaka, it is you, Allah, iyaka, who we worship, na'budu. This change of wording, or this change of placement of the words in the ayah, it literally tells you that there is no one that you worship or we worship except you. Okay, so this gives us the hasr. Okay, تقديم ما حقه التأخير يفيد الحصر والتخصيص, as the qaida says, right? Bringing forth which should have come later in the sentence, it allows for making the sentence or the context specific. طيب, inshallah, it specifies the recipient or the object or the context, whatever the case scenario is. Okay, so we're using these principles from which sciences exactly? We're using this from the nahu and from the balagha, right? We're using the principles of nahu and balagha. I mean, technically, nahu and balagha are the same sciences, but they've been they're studied separately for different reasons, which we'll explain, inshallah, in the madkhal that we do for the Arabic language, inshallah. You'll understand it over there in depth. But over here, you can understand the point that I'm trying to make. Nahu and sarf in itself, it loses its value the moment it stops serving the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, so if these sciences are helping you understand the Book of Allah and the Quran and the Sunnah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then they are khadim, they are servants to these sciences. However, there are other sciences that you study which are ajnabi, okay, أو أجنبي عنهما. So either it's a khadim, the ulum that you study, or ajnabi. They are an ajnabi. Ajnabi, as in Urdu as well, for those of you who understand Urdu, ajnabi is someone who is a stranger. The sciences are either servants to the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or they are ajnabi anhuma, like al-battata. They are complete strangers to these two, al-aslain al-azimain, these two great principles of knowledge. The only two true sources of knowledge that exist in the world. Everything else is relative, subhanallah, right? So, what are those things? Well, they could be things which either don't benefit at all, or they're the same things like Nahw and Sarf, but they're not being used for the Quran and Sunnah. Make sense, inshallah? Right? So it could be the same sciences, but if they're not being servants to the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of His Messenger, sallallahu, then they're not khuddam, they're not servants to the Book of Allah and the Kalami Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, there are sciences which are directly or categorically irrelevant to the study of Al-Quran and Sunnah, such as al-mantiq, logic. Logic is completely useless and irrelevant to the study of the Quran and Sunnah. Okay, completely irrelevant. Muslims did not invent it. They did not need it. Allah Azza wa Jalla had blessed them with intentions, with intellects that far superseded the intellects of any other nation in the world that has ever existed in humanity, subhanAllah. And this is a fact, right? This is a fact. So logic is one example. Then you can have perhaps mathematics, right? Mathematics, as far as the Quran and Sunnah can be served, again has two aspects to it. Mostly, when it comes to theoretical mathematics and others, then it's ajnabi, right? It's a complete stranger to the Book of Allah and the Sunnah, because it doesn't really directly serve the meanings. However, if it is used as a tool to perhaps use it for the counting of the verses, for example, this is a basic example, then, for example, the issues of inheritance, you want to be able to divide inheritance precisely amongst the inheritors of a particular mayyit, right? Over there, arithmetic more precisely becomes important. Then algebra and geometry became important for studying the astronomical bodies, like the moon and its cycles, and predicting, and so on and so forth. So books of the ulama in the past have been written on these sciences. So that's when mathematics can become important. Otherwise, it's mostly, as far as it's the Fermat's last theorem or Riemann hypothesis, all of these big $1 million problems, all of these are useless to the Quran and Sunnah, right? فَلَا يَضُرُّ الْجَهْلُ بِهِ. Allahu Akbar. He says, فَلَا يَضُرُّ الْجَهْلُ بِهِ. Having ignorance with this type of knowledge, which is ajnabi to the service of the Quran and Sunnah, لا يضر, it does not harm you. So even if you spend your entire life away from mathematics or logic or any of these useless and silly waste of time subjects for the aqeedah of the Muslims, for the aqeedah of the humanity and their guidance and so on and so forth, then it will not harm you, because at least you will walk away from this life. You will pass away from this life. You will pass on to the next life, inshallah, at least safe in your iman. And secondly, these sciences don't really help much in the development of the human race, because humanity developed as a direct result of at-tawheed. Okay, the Sahaba, if you want to look at an example of this, the Sahaba were who? They were barefooted shepherds, right? Not having enough clothes to wear. Imam Ibn Khaldun, or Khaldun, as some of the ulama say, the famous scholar of history, the first economist and historiographer of the Islamic literature, Islamic heritage. He discusses that Arabs were essentially an inferior race when it comes to the habits of living, right? Cleanliness and hygiene and all of these. When you observe their habits, the communal habits of the Arabs, you will understand how ill-mannered and how harsh and how rough they were as a people. Which is why the Romans and the Persians didn't really bother much with them, right? Other than, of course, the elites have always been, have had a culture. Other than that, generally speaking, Arabs had a rough socio-economic kind of heritage, right? So it was a rough background, essentially. They were the chavs, if someone understands the word chav. They were the chavs of the world of the time. Okay, if you understand the word chav, right? So, what got them to be, or made them to be, the leading power of the world in just a few decades, right? Less than 5, to be precise, right? It was this knowledge that Allah Azza wa Jalla sent to them. They accepted it, they embraced it, they internalized it, they lived upon it, they lived by it, they illuminated the light of this true knowledge through their action, through their da'wah, through their jihad, through their struggles in the battlefield and off it. And then, as a result of all of this, when people truly got to know the blessing of Tawheed, it is then that the other sciences became relevant for the betterment of humanity, such as mathematics, such as medicine. These are the two most important and beneficial sciences after the sciences of revelation, right? Medicine and then mathematics. Okay, subhanallah. طيب. So I think that much is clear why we believe that Kalamullahi wa Kalami Rasulihi, the Kalam of Allah and the Kalam of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, are the most important knowledge, and they're the only true sources of knowledge. Everything else is either servant to these two, or they are strangers, and you being ignorant or staying ignorant of them will not harm you in your life whatsoever. Which is why we said that the purpose of seeking knowledge, the four criteria of why we seek knowledge, right? That you seek ilm to rectify your ignorance, and then the ignorance of others, and then to revive ilm, and then to act upon it, right? We mentioned the four principles, right? Initially. And we said that what it truly means is to remove the ignorance that you have of Tawheed, teach others at-Tawheed, revive at-Tawheed in the world and in the Sharia of Allah Azza wa Jal, and lastly, you act upon it. By act upon it, i.e. you give da'wah, and you give jihad, and you do jihad, and you do everything that Allah has ordained upon you, subhanAllah. Okay? So this is the crux, and this is why the Shaykh is sort of leading, so he's developing the case, right? After the first three, he's mentioned the fourth one, i.e. the Quran and the Sunnah. This is true knowledge. Okay, let's jump into these beautiful lines of poetry. وما أحسن قول أعياد اليحصبي في كتابه الإلماع يقول العلم في أصلين لا يعدوهما إلا المضل عن الطريق اللاحب علم الكتاب وعلم الآثار التي قد أسندت عن تابع عن صاحبي or عن أصحابي. There's another way of reading it. طيب, Allahu Akbar. The Shaykh says العلم في أصلين, the knowledge, i.e. the thing that you can classify as true knowledge, al-ilm fi aslain, it is in two foundations, it is rooted in two fundamental sources. It is rooted in two fundamental sources. لا يعدوهما إلا المضل. No one strays away from these two. No one strays away from these two عن الطريق اللاحب. هو المضل عن الطريق اللاحب. لا يعدوهما, no one deviates. That we can sort of see it in that way as well. لا يعدوهما, no one deviates from these two. إلا المضل عن الطريق اللاحب, except the one who has strayed away, who has lost his path, the one who has gone off the track. Which track? عن الطريق اللاحب, the clear path. اللاحب, clear, visible. The straight, and then the streamlined path, right? الطريق اللاحب. العلم في أصلين لا يعدوهما إلا المضل عن الطريق اللاحب. Al-ilm is deeply rooted in two sources, two principles, two foundational sources or fundamental sources. لا يعدوهما, no one deviates from them إلا المضل عن الطريق اللاحب, except the one who has strayed away from الطريق اللاحب, from the clear path. What are those aslain? What are those two aslain? What are those two aslain? Can everyone see the screen, inshallah? I think there's an issue with the screen. Okay, let me see if I can do this again, share this again, inshallah. Okay, you guys should be able to see the screen now, inshallah. طيب. Let's continue. العلم في أصلين لا يعدوهما إلا المضل عن الطريق اللاحب علم الكتاب وعلم الآثار التي قد أسندت عن تابع عن صاحب. He said, what are those two aslain? He's clarifying those two aslain now. علم الكتاب, the knowledge of the kitab, i.e. the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. وعلم الآثار, and the knowledge of al-athar, the narrations, the knowledge of the narrations. Athar, i.e. the remnants, would have been left from the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. Okay, Athar is a collective term for all the narrations that have come from the Prophet and the companions. So the word athar is used for all those. Okay, when the word al-hadith is used, it's used for just the hadith of the Prophet, just the narration of the Prophet ﷺ. But ilm al-athar is the collective body of narrations from the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. التي قد أسندت عن تابع عن صاحبي. Which athar? And the Shaykh, he clarifies it over here for his purport. He says, التي, which athar? The ones قد أسندت, which have been strengthened, which have been linked. عن تابع, from a tabi'i. عن صاحبي, from a sahabi. رضوان الله عليهم أجمعين. طيب inshallah. Allahu Akbar. So this is the value that these two, the Quran and Sunnah, hold in our lives. Okay, inshallah. Today we've gone past the time limit for this class. I'll end with a brief statement, inshallah, and then we'll continue sort of exploring this theme tomorrow as well. Since the time of the Prophet ﷺ, many groups have sort of taken birth in this common, pot of multicultural Islam that we have, right? From people from all sorts of ethnicities and races entering Islam, subhanallah. All sorts of groups have taken birth. All sorts of groups and theologies and ideas have taken birth later on. طيب. And then as a result of that, and then of course not just that, but we had philosophies and theologies from other traditions creeping in, either by the ignorance of the initial the scribes who were translating knowledge, and for example, and then disseminating it, and then the innocence and the ignorance of some of the uninitiated teachers in the sciences, like Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina, who the later ulama called they excommunicated them. They said they're not even Muslims, right? Whatever the reason was, we had some external sources, the hypocrites, who put in the doubts within the community by spreading ill information, spreading theology that was alien to the Muslims, like the Greek mythology and the Greek philosophy, and the certain ontological realities of the Greek logic that sort of crept into the Muslim world at that time initially. And this is like the first few the first few centuries of Islam, right? After the 3rd century, essentially, right? Around the time that Imam Ahmad was alive, and roughly before him by a few decades, right? So the time of Harun al-Rashid and basically Hassan al-Basri, he's the first person with whom we find that the contact with the Mu'tazili took place. طيب. And of course Jahm bin Safwan was around that time. So we're talking about a time where tabi'een are alive. They've taken the knowledge from the Sahaba, but now the Sahaba are passing away, and then you see people creeping into the with either sort of disseminating false knowledge into the Sharia, or speaking from their whims, and then again sort of spreading impurities into the pure religion of Islam. In either case, the enemies of Islam, the enemies of Allah Azza wa Jal, have always tried to destroy Islam from any means necessary, right? What has preserved the Ummah until today has always been the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of His Messenger, right? As Allah says in the Quran, if you disagree on a matter, then return it to Allah and His Messenger, right? If you, as a Muslim, as a Muslim body, if you disagree on a matter, فإن تنازعتم في أمر فردوه إلى الله ورسوله أو كما قال Allah Azza wa Jal, when you dispute on a matter, you return it. فردوه إلى الله ورسوله, return it back to Allah and His Messenger. طيب. This is the asl, and this is the asl in al-ilm as well. When we seek knowledge, right, instead of starting with a study of a madhab, of a particular school of thought, starting with logic, or starting with a particular science that is not relevant to the Quran and Sunnah directly, right? Like initially spending so much time in studying the tertiary sciences and not connecting to the Quran and Sunnah from day one. We have seen, and the ulama, they comment on this, we have seen this to be a great cause for the deviance of the Muslims at large and their weakness as a global community, right? Why? Because they think, oh, what's the harm if we just study a school of thought, as a starting point, it's just, everyone is a layman, and they could come up with all sorts of arguments, everyone is a layman, they need an alim, they need a scholar to understand Islam anyway, so might as well just teach them a madhab so that they can at least understand all the principles, the basics of Islam, and then they can, later on study Quran Sunnah. That later on ends up never happening for most people. And subhanAllah, we've seen cases of some of the Hanafi du'at, we speak to them, and they say to us, Wallahi, they say this to us, they said that I've been studying Islam for 20 years. When I read the most difficult books of fiqh, al-Hanafi, I understand everything. But when I read the Quran and Sunnah directly, I don't understand it that well. Right? Like what is ignorance and what is a deviancy greater than this? That you've spent 20 years of your life becoming a mufti in a madhab, and when it comes to really taking the knowledge from its source, really sipping the kawthar, subhanallah, you have no share in that. How deprived do you have to be, subhanallah, right? And this is a common problem. This is why in the past century, Shaykh Al-Albani has written about this, how even in the Haram they had 4 different musallas, right? The Shafi'is would pray separately, Malikis would pray separately, Hanafis and Hanbalis would pray separately. In Syria, in Dimashq, the Hanafis they gave fatwa that the Hanafi women can't marry into the Shafi'is, and the Shafi'is can't marry the Hanafis, and X, Y, and Z. All sorts of nonsense crept into the Ummah just because we left the Quran and Sunnah. We stuck to the books of fiqh, where most of the books right now I'm studying, right? I'm studying these books, right? Some of these books of fiqh and al-madhab al-Hanafi. I can see, subhanAllah, most of the books that have been written, the way they write these books, a lot of it is just qeel wa qaal, it's just statements, it's just personal judgments, right? I'll tell you a very gruesome example. Okay, when you go to the toilet and you want to clean yourself, the istinja, when you do istinja, this is from the Sunnah, la istihya, there's no shame in mentioning the issues of the Sunnah. Particular references as to how a man should clean himself and how a woman should clean himself, right? Particular references to move a finger forward and then back, that specific. Where does the Quran and Sunnah overburden a person to that degree, where now you have to be very careful as to, or if you move your finger backward first and then forward, well, your istinja is not valid, or whatever the case may be, right? Filled with ijtihadat of this nature, filled with kalamun nas. It's like the books of fiqh have become like the Talmuds. They become like the Talmud of the Jewish nation, right? And people, subhanAllah, they spend years upon years studying these books of fiqh, and all they actually end up with is just statements, memorizing and knowing and being aware of the statements of some ulama, like a parrot would parrot some heard information. They have no understanding of the Quran and Sunnah. They have no barakah. They have no nur in knowledge, right? And mostly speaking, these people do not even have Rabbani. They don't have the sifat of Rabbani ulama. They're not even. When you see them, you don't even feel connected to Allah Azza wa Jal, right? Of course, you have ulama everywhere in every madhab who are upright, who are connected to Allah Azza wa Jal, and they're different. But this is a rahmah from Allah. This is a special mercy of Allah upon them. But mostly speaking, anyone who comes through this gateway of studying the deen through the qeel wa qal, through the statements of the scholars as opposed to the Quran and Sunnah directly, right? Regardless of what the exact meaning is, of course, you can trust a scholar, but the point is that, of course, the reality is, yes, you are going to rely on a scholar anyway, right? But at least that scholar should connect you to the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of His Messenger from day one. If he's not doing that, then he's not done his job. He's not Rabbani. He should be connecting to you to the Book of Allah, right? He should be connecting you to the sunnah of his messenger from day one, even if you're a novice, even if you're an amateur, even if you're a layman, because this is the asl of knowledge. And whenever you get stuck, you can ask questions, right? What this does is it teaches a Muslim to have tamassuk with the book of Allah and the sunnah of his messenger. It teaches a Muslim to cling on to the book and the sunnah because it's given priority. Most Muslims, and I'll be honest here, most Muslims do not need to study any madhab, right? And even tullab al-ilm, even students of knowledge, they don't need to study a school of thought unless they want to specialize in a particular madhab, like they want to study fiqh. Let's say they want to specialize in the study of fiqh. Okay? If they don't want to specialize in the study of fiqh, right, and they have any concern with mentioning the differences of opinion in X, Y, and Z, if it's enough for them, right, to, for example, they're in the initial years of seeking knowledge, it's not necessary for them to know all these differences, right? It makes no sense for them to waste all these energies when they could be memorizing the Quran, memorizing the Sunnah, understanding them deeply, right, through its primary sources like usul al-fiqh and a deep understanding of the Arabic language and the fahm of the Salaf al-Salihin, right, studying the manhaj from the books of the Salaf al-Salihin. What is truly life-changing, what is truly transformational is that, if it's anything, right? So inshallah, I want to explore this a bit more in tomorrow's lesson, inshallah. But so we'll call it a day here with this. And I want you to walk away from this lesson knowing that this is the exact manhajiyya that inshallah we're going to be following in our course, that we want to stick to the Quran and the Sunnah from day one, right? We don't want to deviate into qeel wa qal, and this statement or that statement or this school of thought, that school of thought, or this book or that book, right? Our purpose is going to be, inshallah, even when we study fiqh and even when we study the usul, inshallah, we're going to be sticking to the books of the ulama who teach you this madhab, who teach you this ghira, this sense of dignity for the deen of Allah, and sticking to the principles of the Quran and Sunnah, directly, inshallah, as much as you can. And then, of course, you study the madhahib later on, after in the level 2 of our program, where there is need, where someone wants to specialize in fiqh and they want to become a mufti, they want to give fatwa, they want to put themselves in a position, right? Not everyone is going to be in that position, right? So in the initial years, we learn the seerah, we learn the sunnah, we learn the tafsir, we act upon it, we internalize it, we live by it, we call others to it, we learn aqidah. These are the initial phases of a student of knowledge, inshallah, right? This is all knowledge is al-Quran wa sunnah and everything that is connected to it, inshallah. The books of the madhahib, they have a place, they have a time, and they have a place of the for study, but that is not in the initial years, not in the first 10 years, I believe, inshallah. Okay, so with this, we'll call it a day here. Let's jump into our Arabic session. Hopefully everyone benefited from this. And this is a very important theme. I want to explore more of this, inshallah, in tomorrow's lesson. Jazakumullah khaira. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.